how do you know when it's time to optimize?
It's always time to optimize.
Okay, then let me move on to a second part of that question is what's a reasonable time frame to make that decision?
Absolutely. So I think I'm always.
I love that answer.
No, I think for me it's about like intelligent, but sometimes imperfect progress. And this
Okay,
is
that's interesting.
coming back to your point around like being comfortable that you cannot measure everything exactly.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Hope It Helps, and my guest on the show today is Mr. Andrew Laity. Andrew, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Khaled. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. So, guys, just to give you some context about how me and Andrew met. So, I launched my first event a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about building podcasts with communities. And Andrew was kind enough, to attend, and that's where we met. And then we grabbed a coffee, and from our conversation, Andrew, I learned a lot just from our little coffee chat. You look at marketing in a very, I think, unique way that a lot of people don't. As you've said, not me, guys. As he said, he's a nightmare to deal with because you challenge things and you go deeper into data and kind of what the outcomes of all this really are. So I wanted to talk to you today about your perspective on marketing. What are the things that you see that people are doing wrong? How do you work with clients? When you're doing, for example, an audit, what are the kind of metrics and stuff you're looking for? And dive into a lot of more different things. But before we get into everything, Andrew, could you, if you could please give us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Amazing. Yeah. So thank you ever so much. I think, the comment about being a nightmare was certainly in my earlier career. I think when you are young and, sort of fresh out of university and you come in with a need and a want to ask questions and
Sure.
figure out how things work, then, sometimes even if you sugarcoat it, it's not taken too well by people with many years experience. But
Sure.
I think as my career has progressed, people, particularly clients, have been more open to having frank and open discussions around how to improve things. I think there's no shame in acknowledging that something isn't working perfectly.
Absolutely.
As long as you sort of putting in a plan in place to try and improve it. I think for me, I'm not someone who fits neatly into a box.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly haven't had a linear career path. I studied engineering. Found myself in marketing. I think I sit very much at I sort of see marketing as a spectrum. You've got on one side, extreme creativity, and on the other side, very numerical, analytical. I think I definitely sit towards that end of the spectrum.
Sure.
And absolutely love experimenting, looking to constantly improve and iterate and build on things. I think it tends to lead me to say, I think about marketing differently. For me, it's thinking about accountability of marketing. How does marketing grow a business? How does marketing drive revenue? There can be different stages of awareness, but I think always thinking about how are you building that relationship with a customer or prospective customer to try and grow the business.
No, absolutely, man. And I think I love what you said there, that it is a spectrum. On one side, you're right, it's more the creativity side, more creative focus, and on the other is the analytical side and the data and so on. So I think you come from a unique background because not many engineers end up in marketing. Engineers typically will go into, if they don't go into engineering, for example, they'll go into consulting, they'll go into finance, they'll work at banks, they'll follow the numbers in a way. And marketing from an outsider's perspective, when you think of the layman, if you want to call me the average person, when I think of marketing, my brain doesn't first go to numbers. It probably goes more to the creative side. But like I was saying, you have a very unique perspective. So I want to understand from you, first of all, let's say it's the first time we sit down, we just met, and I ask you, Andrew, what's your perspective on marketing? What is the goal of marketing from your perspective? What would you say?
I think, marketing, for me, it's about, it's about growing businesses. It's a way of interacting with your customers at various stages of that life cycle. And I think what has frustrated me in the past, and where I see opportunities to improve, is a lot of marketeers or marketing agencies will focus more on the very, very top level, the superficial, they would talk to you about big numbers, they'll talk to you about impressions as an example. For me, that is simply a start point. Impressions are, simply how many people have seen your marketing communication message.
Sure.
And I think it's about taking it to that deeper level. One of the sort of jokey phrases I was using the other day was impressions don't pay salaries.
Facts.
But it's true. And I think, sometimes as marketeers, you can get a little bit lost in the craft and forget, about why, you're truly there. And, you're there to either grow the business you're working for, or you're there to help grow a client's business. And I think it's, constantly having that frame of mind and saying, how are we growing revenue? How are we, enhancing this business? Because it's different, and at different stages, this is why I like to think about marketing as a spectrum. As a marketer, you're constantly solving problems. Be that, nobody is aware of our business, or we aren't experiencing a high enough conversion rate, or we have low retention. There's often common problems that you're trying to solve, and each of those will require a slightly different approach.
Sure.
So I think that's sort of how I think about it, but always thinking back to what is the impact on the bottom line? So I'm a CFO's friend as a marketeer, that's for sure.
So like you said, from your perspective, it's about growing. In simple terms, it comes back to growing a business, either yours or your clients. And like you correctly said, that different objectives will require different approaches. But I understand from you that, I know from your perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, the most important function, it seems, of marketing, from your perspective and from the articles that I've read that you've written, is revenue, right? That's the most important objective. Everything's important, yes, but that is the most important objective. So then I started to think, I'm like, okay, and kind of like what we were just talking about off camera, I'm like, if revenue is that golden thing, that's what we're all working towards. And if you take a step back, I think everything else you do, whether it's awareness, whether it's the content creation, it all feeds back to driving more revenue for the business. So if revenue is the number one focus, and should be the number one focus, if I understood it from you correctly, does the rest really matter then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You never, nobody's just going to wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go and buy Khaled's product.
Sure. Sure. I wish.
If you would, if that happened, you'd be enjoying yourself on a beach somewhere.
Absolutely.
I think it's all about that process. And I think sometimes you'll see it maybe with like direct to consumer brands. They can sort of misinterpret a focus on revenue with immediacy. And like really focus on lower end of the funnel. So everything is trying to drive a conversion there and then. I think a great approach to marketing, again, this changes depending on the business. One thing I really am against is trying to force a framework or a template onto a business. It's about letting data guide you and understand where the opportunities are for a specific client or a specific business, because the opportunities are different. But where I say revenue is important, I think it's always having revenue in the back of the mind and thinking about how are you moving someone through a funnel. Okay. Because broadly speaking, it can go from awareness to consideration, purchase, retention, loyalty, advocacy. Are they recommending other people? But, broadly speaking, you have to start with, giving the customer or your prospective audience an understanding that you exist. And I think this is where you can trip up, is assuming the customer knows as much about your product as you do.
Very true.
So when thinking about marketing, always sort of ask the question, like, will my direct response adverts have a better conversion rate if the customer is already, feeling warmly about my product, or feeling warmly about my brand? Has a friend referred them? Referral traffic tends to be very, very high converting because there has been an interaction that happened before you've even been able to track that behavior online. If I were to say, hey, Khaled, I went to this restaurant the other day, it was amazing, you should try it, that's probably going to have much greater sway over your decision-making process than just seeing a generic advert on Instagram.
Very true.
As an example.
For sure.
But if I've referred a restaurant to you maybe 6 months ago and you've said, oh, I'd love to go there one day, and then you forget about it, and then suddenly that Instagram advert pops up and you're like, oh, yes, absolutely. That was the restaurant Andrew was talking to me about. Oh, we should go. So it's about, I think, not thinking about things in isolation and having a blend of approaches that, you're always thinking about, how do I guide someone towards a purchase? But I suppose it's like dating. If you ask someone out within 30 seconds of meeting them, you're probably going to get a no. But, if you build a warmer relationship, you have a conversation first, then, there's a greater chance of you getting a date.
No, that is such a great analogy. That it really makes things clear, at least to me. I really understood what you were talking about. When you talk about the funnel and the fact that the rest is important, when you're saying that, a lot of times it seems that marketing agencies or marketeers look at things in isolation rather than looking at the big picture. And I think from the conversations I've had with marketeers on my show, and because my wife has been in marketing for years, that does seem to be a common theme that I've heard. I've never heard it'd be like, oh, this campaign has to go well. You hear about that activation, that event, that specific thing you're trying to do to achieve whatever that goal is. But rarely have I heard someone talk about it from the way you're describing it as that whole journey. We're at this stage, this campaign, we're doing this to get us to that next stage, and so on. And coming back to the sales funnel, so I've read a couple of your articles that you wrote on LinkedIn. By the way, I was very impressed with how well they're written, super structured, super clear. But you're an engineer, so I'm not surprised at how it flowed. The numbers were there too. In one of them, you said that. And I didn't know this, that that the UAE is known to be a transient market, but I didn't know the average lifetime of someone here is for almost 4.5 years, give or take. So, and you were talking about how companies consider localizing maybe the content, but they don't consider localizing the monetization strategy or their retention strategy, and how in a transient market that you need to, because that lifetime is so short, acquisition needs to always be, at the forefront of it. And that's something you really need to focus on. I love what you said, retain where you can, but always be ready to acquire. And I think that, kind of sums it up very nicely. So I wanted to first start off, because I've got a couple of questions on this specific topic. First of all, I wanted to ask, given you've been here for about, I think, 7 or 8 years, we were discussing last time, what have you found to be effective or the most effective retention strategies in your experience, and then move on to the acquisition side?
So I think retention is a really interesting one, because it depends on what is that relationship and how are you trying to retain, and what are you retaining them for. So what I think is really, really fascinating is think about it in the context of different businesses. So one of the clients I work with is an art business. It's a very, very unique and personal piece. If you buy one, that's all you need. So the likelihood of you repeat purchasing is really, really low if you're thinking about purchasing for yourself. So for that company, the retention strategy is, you want to retain the customer, but actually, in reality, your opportunity to sell is if they are buying it as a gift for a friend. So then retention in that context is really, really focused around messaging on gifting and, CRM. But you understand that they're not going to purchase every week. So you maybe want to, you know, keep them around, but you don't want to over communicate to the point that they unsubscribe. Because I think that as well is a sort of a trait that I've seen a lot here is, I have the email address, I'm going to use it. And, you know, you end up over communicating with customers to the point where they're like, Kalas, I'm done. Like, finished, unsubscribe. And you've lost that opportunity to retain the relationship. But if you're a food delivery company, you know, say Talabat, Deliveroo, the retention is an individual basis. You know, if you're ordering your behavior as a customer is ordering shopping once a week, and, you know, maybe you order groceries 2 times a month and you get a takeout 3 times a month, as an example. If you then haven't purchased for 3 weeks, the likelihood of you churning is quite high. But for the art business, I could not see a customer for 6 months, but they could still come back and retain. Or it's not retain, they could come back and increase their lifetime value.
Sure.
So I think the retention strategies are so unique to the business. And I think coming back to that sort of my mentality of like never being afraid to ask questions. You know, put yourself in that shoes. You know, if you're a customer of Talabat, how frequently are you purchasing? How frequently would you purchase? And understanding that will be different for every business, because sometimes there might be, you know, a transient relationship. I'm trying to think of a good example. You know, fuel for your car you need every week.
Yeah.
You know, realistically.
Yeah.
But maybe if you are buying shoes, you might buy a new pair of shoes every 3 months. And I think thinking about that and really diving into the customer mindset will really help build a retention strategy that works for the business.
Yeah, that's such a great answer, because even for myself, you know, with my business and what I'm trying to do, it took me a long time to start thinking with that mindset, like put myself in the customer's shoes and kind of work backwards to what are their struggles, what is the messaging that would need to go to them, how long would they stick around for. So you talked about lifetime value, and this is, I'm familiar with lifetime value, but in my mind, I've never, because I just don't know, I've never understood how can I calculate that. I know it's very business specific, of course, and whether it's a product is one thing, whether it's a service is one thing, the niche or whatever that, you know, whatever you're selling is. How can I, what is, I guess, I literally don't know, so you're teaching me here. How do I start thinking about that lifetime value, and what's a good LTV to customer acquisition ratio tip? Is there like an industry average that, you know, you're like, if you're around here, that's pretty good? So could you tell me that like piece and how like that all kind of works?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think having a guide, even if it's an estimate of lifetime value, helps you understand how much will you be willing to pay for a customer. Because I think that, particularly if you're a smaller business, if you're self-funded, that ratio is really important. You know, you'll sometimes see if, and less so at the moment, because there's sort of less equity floating around in startup world. But if you have companies that are targeted on user acquisition, for example, they may employ a growth at all costs mentality, and their goal is to monetize later. You tend to see this with networked or marketplace-based businesses, like, you know, Facebook as an example, famously didn't monetize for, you know, sort of several years, but they built a very strong network that gave them a much better opportunity to monetize. If you are an e-commerce business, you want to be looking at your unit economics from a very early stage, because if you are selling a product for $100 and, you know, it's costing you $100 to acquire a customer, you're going to have to work really, really hard to increase that lifetime value to make sure that, you know, you are able to grow profitably.
Sure.
You know, the last thing you want is to, you know, over deploy capital and be in a situation where, you know, you're running out of business because of cash flow. So for me, lifetime value comes back to that behavior. And you could forecast it. So say, for example, you know, we use the food delivery example again. if you're ordering groceries once a week and you're spending, say 200 dirhams on groceries, and you're ordering 2 takeouts a month, which, say you're spending 200 dirhams on that again. So in theory, you could spend 6 transactions with Talabat at an average basket size of 200 dirhams each. That would give you a monthly value to that company of 1,200 dirhams. So you then sort of want to be careful about extrapolating that out too generously, because you can't assume that pattern will hold throughout the entire year.
Yeah.
There'll be elements of seasonality, particularly if it's a family, they might, travel away during school holidays. But as a start point, if I say, the average customer is worth 1,200 dirhams to me within the first month, you can look at that monthly return. So for me, then I'd be saying, okay, if I want to maintain a cost of acquisition it's not technically lifetime value because it's just that first month.
Sure.
Say you want to target a ratio of 3 to 1. Then you're saying as a marketing team, okay, I know that I'm happy to spend 400 dirhams per customer that I acquire, because I know that I will get a return on that within 1 month. You might also look at terms that might come up when you're sort of justifying marketing spend is payback window. So a finance professional, CFO within a business might say, okay, if I'm going to give you 100,000 dirhams to spend on marketing, when can we expect that back? So you could then say, actually, if we on that sort of ratio there, you would expect to spend 100,000 dirhams in a month, and you'd get 300,000 dirhams back within that same month. So your payback window realistically is a week or so.
Yeah.
Just over a week if you sort of divide that up. That then would give a finance professional, who are usually signing off your budget,
Sure.
much more confident that you have an understanding of how you're going to deploy those funds and how you're going to generate value for the business.
Yeah.
And you might do that in a number of different ways. It might not all be, hey, buy my product. It might be more brand building. It might be, educating the customer about the product features or the services. But always sort of thinking around, am I spending a reasonable amount of money for the amount of money that I get in return? You think about, if you were to buy a pair of shoes, for example, if you're paying 700 dirhams, say, for the pair of shoes, you then have to think about, okay, well, how frequently might someone buy the pair of shoes? So, I don't know, 3 pairs of shoes a year, as an example. So then you're saying, okay, well, actually, my value that I could generate by acquiring a new customer might be 2,100 dirhams. But if it's a physical product, you want to then also think about your profit margins, because you don't want to spend, say you spend 1,200 dirhams to acquire 2,100 dirhams, but actually the shoes cost you 1,500 dirhams as a retailer to buy, and your margin is only sort of 20 or 30%. Then you have to be really aware of that as a marketeer to, ultimately drive value for the business. And that's why you tend to see, software businesses are happy to have higher cost of acquisition, particularly subscription businesses, because they are forecasting that they will generate more value from an individual customer over a particular window of time.
Yeah.
So I think for me, like, minimum for a growth business, you want to be looking at like a 3 to 1 return on your spend. But that payback window, or when you actually see the returns of that, could be quite fluid depending on the product. And that sort of goes back to that need. If you're a fuel business, let's take Cafu, for example, right? Because it's tracked, it's digital. It's very hard for ADNOC to know Andrew turned up to the petrol station after seeing my ad and bought petrol. Like it really is. So
yeah.
And that's that. But a digital product such as Cafu, they could say, Andrew saw a Facebook advert. He downloaded the app. He bought fuel a week later, as an example. But if it is, I don't know, say your business, you're looking for a marketing agency, that consideration window is so different for you.
Sure.
You know, you maybe will have coffee, you'll have a couple of meetings, you'll meet 3 or 4 agencies, you'll then say, okay, actually, I know I'd like to go further with this. That could be 3, 4, you know, even more months for you to, as a client, to make a decision on whether or not to engage with a service provider.
Yeah.
So when you're running those marketing campaigns, it's understanding, based on what I'm selling, what would be a normal period of time before I'd expect to see a result from this.
Yeah. But man, it's so listening to that explanation and listening to what you've been talking about. I think one of the things, I'm just speaking from personally here, is I think I've tended to, on my side, discount or not give enough attention to the customer behavior. Everyone wants just to get more clients, but I don't think I can put my hand up and say, you know, only I'd say recently have these thoughts and this approach started to like come into my business and how I think and so on. I think we get so caught up in the how without coming back to the why. You know, why would this person buy? What is their need? The payback period, how much do you want to invest, and so on. So on the investment, just to touch on the acquisition lifetime value thing. If, let's say, I can project for my business the lifetime value of a customer. Let's say I've got that estimate.
Yeah.
But I don't have the financial resources to invest to get that client. What would you say to me then? What are some other things I could do if financially you don't have the resources to hit that target that you want or that ratio? What else can I do to start building that engine so then I can start putting some more, you know, focusing on the revenue to get money to invest it back into, you know, advertising and marketing campaigns and so on?
Absolutely. I think it's thinking about, you know, the term often sort of thrown about is growth hacks. You know, growth hacks tends to be a sort of catch-all for things that you can do as a business or as a marketeer that maybe don't cost. You know, some of the you know, advice that I've read before for early stage businesses is, you know, embrace things that don't scale. And an example of that could be you see a conversation, going back to the shoe example, you see someone on Reddit ask, what's the best shoes for running a 5K? And you, as you, the founder or the brand, you engage in that conversation and say, oh, hey, you know, we've got perfect pair of running trainers for you. Check them out. That's a form of marketing. That's a form of potential acquisition. Hasn't cost you anything. It's cost you time. So I think in the earlier stage, it's thinking about how can you deploy your time? You know, what is it that you can do? You know, do you have any customers already? You know, because if you have customers already, then maybe you can look at incentivizing referral. You know, you can say, hey, you know, introduce a friend and we'll, you know, give you a voucher, we'll give you some cash back, or we'll give you a discount on your next order. That's a form of marketing. It hasn't cost you anything up front. You know, there's not an initial investment. You know, you sort of, the payout is deferred. You know, if you are running affiliate campaigns, then, you know, the reason they're loved is because you only pay when you actually receive the sale. But, you know, constantly thinking about that, you know, you could, I don't know, if you were with the running shoes, go down to Kite Beach. Go down to Kite Beach with your running shoes and ask 10 people running by, do you want to try my shoes? As an example. And I think that, you know, sometimes it's not, the easier things tend to be expensive, or the most obvious things tend to be expensive, like Google paid search, for example.
Yeah.
The beauty of Google paid search is that customers or prospective customers are telling you exactly what they want. They're like, what are the best running shoes to do the, you know, Dubai Marathon, as an example. The problem is that's not an insight. That's not a unique perspective. Every single company that sells running shoes are going to be, hey, you should buy mine. So, you know, the cost per click for that kind of marketing interaction is going to be high because there's a lot of competition. It's the obvious place to go. And this is why you see with certain industries such as insurance, which tend to be commoditized, tend to be driven by price, there's very little brand loyalty. There'll be brand awareness because there's, you know, constant advertising, but nobody's passionate about buying insurance.
True.
You just do it. Like you need it, you've got to get it done.
Yeah.
So the battleground for insurance companies is paid search, because the typical customer behavior tends to be, need to get the insurance done, insure my car. And then boom, every advertiser under the sun is there trying to grab your sale.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of work. Right? It doesn't take you a lot to set up that campaigns. It takes you a lot to optimize those campaigns and to try and refine them and try to reduce your cost per click. But as an advertiser, you could set up a paid search campaign within 10 minutes. But because of that ease and that sort of obvious nature of it, everyone does it.
Yeah.
So then you think, okay, well, I don't know, as an insurance company, what could I do that is kind of going against the grain? How could I think asking someone to love an insurance company is a bit of an ask, but how could I do something different that rather than people just generically searching for insurance, how could people search for my insurance brand? You know, what is the reason that they might do that? You know, the same with shoes. You know, you want to try and get people to want your product so that you can kind of stay out of the trenches in a sense and actually have that fight where people know roughly what they want, but they kind of don't care about the product. They don't care about the provider.
Sure.
They just need to get that sorted. So I think that, you know, bring it back to the question that you actually asked me originally is think about where your customers are. Because, you know, what gets you from 0 to 1 might not get you from 1 to 100. But if you can start getting traction, you can start getting revenue in, it gives you more flexibility. But yeah, never be afraid to try different things in that early stage. And they can be really lo-fi. They don't have to be fancy. There doesn't have to be any fancy tools, any fancy marketing budget. That could simply be gifting.
Yeah.
You know, one of the ways that, you know, we saw a lot of success for the art business was gifting the prints. You know, you gift them away to people that, you know, you really saw as your perfect target audience and ask them to do a collab post. And the beauty of that is you're then, you know, you're getting into their audience and you get a sort of warm referral, warm recommendation. Yes, it costs because you've got to account the cost of the product. But I think, you know, if you're starting a business, I think you need to acknowledge that you will need to account for some costs.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be a, you know, $1 million a year advertising budget.
Sure.
But, you know, if you can carve out something that allows you, you know, whether you're, you know, paying for a referral or whether you are gifting a product or, you know, whether you're doing a small test with a partnership or a content creator, I think if you have completely zero, maybe it's a time, you know, and 0 could be time or 0 could be money. But if you have 0 to, you know, commit, then maybe it's not the best time to be starting the business. But I think get creative.
Get creative,
you know,
yeah.
Ask how and where could you find your prospective customers.
Yeah, I think that's that's such a good advice because the constraints, or let's say the financial constraint, will force you to think of more creative ways to approach this,
Absolutely.
of different things to do. But like you kind of, I love what you said, going from 0 to 100 is one thing, going from 100 and above is a completely different thing because but I feel that is, once a company grows, that's where this type of thinking, this more creative, critical, call it guerrilla marketing, out of the box thinking, tends to fade away because it's like, all right, guys, now we've built it and now we want to just steady the ship and not change too much to keep this, you know, to keep this thing running, to retain that customer and so on. You mentioned Google Ads, paid search and Google. So as I mentioned last week, I told you I used to work at an agency and I had someone on my podcast not long ago, shout out Herman if you're watching. And we were talking about email marketing versus Google Ads. Now, just like I asked him, you'll say it's very dependent on the business and nature of the business and so on. Like the examples you gave with shoes or, the insurance, two completely different customers, approaches, mindsets, wants, and needs for these products. Now, email, so my background is in sales too. So I've done the email marketings, the cadence, the campaign. On Monday, reach out to this guy. On Tuesday, he hasn't responded, send this email, and so on. So I haven't had the best, especially cold email marketing. More than if it's inbound, they've downloaded the white paper. I've got something there. Usually that's where you're gonna get better results. So he told me that maybe it's from his experience or data that he looked at that 76% of Google ad campaigns fail because Google's priority is not necessarily to position you at the right time or to the best audience. It's about running through that budget that you've kind of set. But with email marketing, something much more low cost that you are yourself putting the list together or collating it from wherever that is, can have a much higher return for you given the time investment, the cost, and so on. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think for something like this, everyone's going to have a different answer. It was the first time I heard that before, personally. So it was very interesting to me. And I was reflecting on the campaigns that I've run and the success and so on. So email marketing, Google Ads, take out the concept that, yes, it is business dependent for sure. But just on that element, what are your thoughts? What's your perspective?
So I have I have opinions.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. That's exactly what I want to hear. Yeah.
No, but what I think is interesting as well, and it kind of touches on your point you made a moment ago about when companies sort of stop doing the more creative things like the guerrilla marketing, is the difficulty of measuring. As soon as your company gets to a certain stage and you have, investors and shareholders and CFOs and, people that you need to, you're held accountable to, companies tend to get more conservative.
Yeah.
Because they have to, sort of justify what they are doing. And it then becomes essentially a case of how difficult is that thing to measure? And what bias is being introduced? And this is where it comes back to like questioning things, right? Because whenever someone presents any data point to me, I'm always like, okay, what's the source?
Yeah.
And how can I go and validate that for myself?
Yeah.
Because I'll give you an example. Somebody could have set up a terrible campaign on Google Ads. And I've seen this time and time again. One of the things that I love doing, and honestly, this tells way too much about me, but whenever I run a paid ads campaign, I love inferring what the strategy of the competitors are by looking at the data around behavior and insights around search.
Okay.
I can normally, with a pretty good degree of accuracy, understand how someone has set up their campaign based on what you see as an output. And that's to come back to the engineering mindset, is break things down into blocks and constantly want to understand how things work.
Exactly.
Used to be my favorite channel growing up. Everyone else is like, oh, let's watch football. I'm like, I want to watch how it works on the Discovery Channel. What I see time and time again here is companies will set up their Google Ads campaigns. They'll set up a daily spend limit, but they won't set up a limit on their keyword terms. And what that ends up doing is they will run through their budget before the day is out. So you have an incredible arbitrage on what time of the day you bid.
Exactly, yeah.
Because what will happen is, say you spend 100 dirhams a day, and your cost per quick click is 20 dirhams. As soon as you have 5 clicks, that's it, you're done. Google's not showing you for the rest of the day. Like, you've exhausted your daily budget. There's some variance in this because the daily budget is an indication, but over the course of a week, you won't get more than 5 clicks a day. But what I find fascinating is you'll see companies that set up daily limit on total spend, no limit on bids, and as soon as they run out of money, the cost to win that auction drops. So for me, I'll look at it and say, okay, cool. I'll let you guys scrap it out in the morning. As soon as you guys are done, I'm just going to sweep up the traffic in the afternoon at a lower cost per click. So whenever someone says X channel is better than Y channel, I'll always say, okay, well, how did you set it up? What was it that you were doing that meant that you didn't see success on that channel? You can flip it to email marketing. If you said about the cold leads versus warm leads, if I have captured that email address because someone has downloaded a white paper and I email, say, 100 people, and they've all downloaded that white paper, the chance of me getting a high response rate to that is incredibly good. Imagine I compare that with a database of 10,000 people that have not explicitly consented to receive content from me, but someone sold me a database. It's not comparable.
Yeah.
The bias is baked into it because you're not comparing like for like. You know, one of the things I'm very, very passionate about is building authentic relationships with customers as a brand. Never, ever in my career have I bought a data set at all. I ran a market research business previously, and the amount of companies that would come to me and say, can I buy your database? Every time would be a no. And I was saying, I'm saving you from yourself. Like, honestly, if you're a B2C company and you're trying to buy databases, it's like you're not going, it's just not going to be effective for you. Worse still, you could trash your domain rating based on everyone that receives that email going spam, unsubscribe. And this comes back to measurement. You see sometimes a lack of sophistication in measurement. So when that happens, it'll tend to be trying to compare channels and trying to compare channels like for like, rather than understanding what role does that channel play in my customer lifecycle. Email can be wonderful later in the life cycle when someone has expressly consented to receive content from you, because they're warm, they're receptive to it, they want to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah.
If you're just, spamming the inbox of someone that hasn't consented to receive that email from you, it's probably not going to go very well. Or even if people do click on it, it's probably going to be quite low quality traffic, probably won't, coming back to the point, probably won't lead to revenue.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah.
But, say you are a company that has, someone has downloaded that white paper, they probably want to know when you next release a white paper.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's thinking about the context in which you received that data and how can that then be utilized as part of the marketing plan going forward? Because honestly, I go into my email account now and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Right? Because
yeah, absolutely.
And it was like the other day, and I'm not going to name and shame, but I've just recently set up my business. I went to an event in Dubai. Very first time I used that brand new email address to sign up for anything. Next week, I have got 10 different inbound email requests trying to sell me services.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
Again, not everyone's the same.
Of course.
But my mindset is authentic.
Yeah.
Build that authentic connection.
Yeah.
Rather than spamming. And it comes back to how hard are you willing to work? Because honestly, buying a database and spamming them without any context of who they are, why they've interacted with you, they often haven't. It's lazy. I'll be honest. I'll say how it is. It is lazy approach to marketing.
Yeah.
You've not gone through the hard work to think about who the customer is, why is it that they would want to buy from you, and the thing as well is the challenge now is with AI. it's even easier stroke lazier
Yeah,
to automate
absolutely.
cold outreach.
Yeah, of course.
So, I can see it now. Like, you see people have the automated LinkedIn comments. They
Yep.
have the automated LinkedIn messages. It comes, I suppose, adjacent to the point we talked about with Google Ads earlier. The more people that are competing in a particular space, the less effective it becomes. So if everyone's doing cold outreach, then the likelihood of, your cold outreach getting through, it's slim to none.
Yeah.
So it might be a zero investment in terms of dollars spent, but the investment in time is really high.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, like, what is the opportunity cost? Like, if it takes me like a whole day to cold call a bunch of people on a list that I've, grabbed hold of from somewhere, how many of those do you think convert? Like, if you had 9 hours in a day, what could you have spent those hours on?
Yeah.
And this is the thing, someone could come and comment on this and say, oh, I've had a great with cold outreach.
Of course,
and I'm
yeah.
sure people will have.
Sure, yeah.
But I think for me personally,
Yeah.
I think, again, working a lot on the B2C side is, it's how are you measuring it,
Yeah.
and what is deemed to be success.
Yeah.
Because sure, you could email 10,000 people that are, that haven't consented to receive content from you. You might get 10 clicks, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But how many sales did you get? And what you'll tend to see is the dreaded impression. Is you'll get a report and say, oh, your marketing campaign last month got 100,000 impressions.
Yeah.
But if you did 100,000 impressions and only 10 people actually looked at your website, it's not giving me confidence that is an interaction that is going to contribute to the success of a business.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's, why I love thinking about the funnel. And this isn't me shunning awareness campaigns by any stretch of the imagination. It's just thinking about the right message at the right time.
Yeah.
And understanding that you have to measure different channels in different ways.
Yeah.
We sort of talked about it briefly earlier about like the conservatism and, looking at what's easy to measure.
Yeah.
This is why, the common way, so just for context for anyone listening, the common way of measuring or attributing a sale is with a method called last click attribution.
Yeah.
So if you're a website, it will be, what was the immediate thing a customer did before they arrived at the website?
Yeah.
And that's why Google gets attributed so many sales, because the common, say you're on TikTok,
yeah,
and you see a video and you see something you like in that video. Very rarely will you disrupt your browsing experience on TikTok.
Yeah, very
honestly,
true.
honestly
100%.
speaking, right? And this is coming back to thinking about customer behavior.
100%.
I love psychology, and always sort of thinking about like that behavior.
Yeah.
It also happens with podcasts. So you might sponsor a podcast, and despite the you might sponsor a podcast, and the host might read a wonderful review of the product and say, hey, click on the link in the show notes.
Yes.
I can tell you, like 9 times out of 10, at least, the customer will not click on the show notes. They will continue listening to that podcast, and then potentially later that day or maybe later that week, they'll go, that product Khaled was talking about.
Yeah.
And then they'll Google it. So what will end up happening is, if you're a marketeer and you're focused, you're told, hey, prove to me what worked this month. If you're just looking at what happened immediately before the arrival to the website, you'd be like, Google is absolutely smashing it. We need to put more money into Google.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that Google didn't generate that demand. Google captured that demand. The demand was generated elsewhere. And this is the thing that's really, really difficult for marketeers to measure, particularly when it's not a fully digitized journey, or the journey transcends platforms, for example.
Yeah.
And this is why events can be really difficult to measure, because you'll have an offline experience that then becomes online. The demand is realized online, but the demand was generated offline. And this is where one of the things I love is customer psychology, but also measurement, because you can get false flags. You would look at Google and say, hey, Google is where we're getting our traffic from. We should put more money in there. Yeah. But if you rip that budget away from something that was actually generating the demand in the first place, and you move it just to the demand capture, then you could end up seeing diminishing results over time. It might look great to begin with, but it's about thinking about that whole journey. And this is why I try to deploy budget at different levels throughout that customer journey, and look at things that are maybe difficult to measure, because it means that my competition, other marketeers, other agencies, are going to be overlooking it.
So first of all, that was like fantastic. That was awesome. Really, it was like a masterclass on like just like that. I love what you said about, first of all, email marketing, because I've done it myself too, and listening to your description of it, I'm like, as we said, inbound always more successful than just cold. And then you think about, because in sales and marketing, we're kind of two sides of the same. We're like one team that's split into two different, responsibilities. We need you guys to get us the awareness, get people downloading those white papers, so then we can come in and, continue that journey. We used to work with, obviously, sales and marketing. We used to work very closely with each other, because we'd go back and forth on, this is what we're hearing from customers, and this is the kind of messaging that we need to translate to it, and so on. But I don't think, or maybe this is the first time it's clicked for me when you talked about when in the cycle you do that. Because I would think, just traditionally in my experience is like, all right, that's step one, database, lots of emails, whatever, and run them through that cadence and see what comes through. And I've spoken to salespeople on the podcast. I've been in sales, you touched on quality of relationships, which is what at the essence sales is. But sales is also a numbers game, and you also need that funnel. So with that database example that you said, I'm like, I totally agree. But it's also, there's elements of it that are still relevant, is you still do need volume to go through that, to have, conversions and so on. Yeah. On the Google Ads side, you talked about, your approach is very interesting and how you go about it, and looking at how things run through campaigns. Like when you talked about, I've run campaigns in the past with agencies for myself. There was a daily limit and so on. But keywords is something, honestly, Andrew, that has really been like thrown at my face this year. It just keeps popping up, and no matter what conversation I'm having, the importance of keywords. And I'm going to park that for a second, because we're going to come back. I want to dive deep into like the keyword world. But you talked about measurement, and that there's a lack of sophistication in measurement, and then that sometimes there's things that are leading you to the thing you can measure that you can't measure, which creates another layer of complexity. Now, I read one of your articles that you talked about, but measurement can also be a double-edged sword, because then, like you said in your article, we want exact over-measured data versus good enough measurement, because kind of like everything we've talked about so far, and how you explained that marketing is that combination of data and being comfortable with the unknown and that creativity. And you kind of have to have both sides of that. If you're over measuring, you're losing the creativity. If you're not measuring enough, then you don't know what's working and what's not. So, but I think you've worked in agencies, I've worked in an agency before. That is, while I agree with that, it's the next question I start to think about is, all right, I agree with Andrew. We need that combination. It's the how. That's where the sauce is. I'm like, I agree with that statement. I agree with that strategy, that approach. But how can we, and everyone still, unfortunately, at least from my perspective, is still running on exact measurement, traditional thinking. I spent this impression. I want that dollar return. You know, very linear, very give and go, and now.
Absolutely.
So, how do you start? I guess how can we start changing? That's a mindset thing. That's not even if I give you a strategy to do it, you might just think like, fuck that. No, I don't like. Although I agree with that, I still have, like you say, I have to answer to my CFO. I still need numbers on this campaign. So, how do we start shifting that mindset, and then not only that, implementing it right after?
And this comes in as well to the point you made about sales. Typically, sales people are incentivized with monthly targets.
We are.
But this is the thing. It's
true.
like one of the things I, again, comes aligned with my passion for psychology, is unintended consequences. So if you come back to the point we talked about earlier about, say you're the hypothetical situation where you're looking to appoint an agency, the period from you generating a lead with a prospective agency to you making a decision, I'd say for a marketing agency is very unlikely to be within a 1 month window. So, but you have a sales team that are incentivized to hit their monthly targets. So the unintended consequence of that is they might not take you through that journey, or they're trying to shortcut aspects of that journey because of the pressure that they're put on to hit the KPI and target that's given to them. Marketeers and salespeople are very good at hitting the targets you give them. Right? It's human nature. If you're given a target, you will find a way to reach it.
Yeah.
Your income often depends on that. So for me, it comes back to what incentive structures are you laying out as a business? If you're in a business leadership, what incentives are you creating? What are the unintended consequences of that? Because that's why, one of the cost per acquisition, as an example, if you set a fixed cost per acquisition goal, that might lead you to channels like Google, which can be easily measured, but are demand capture. Mm-hmm. This comes into keywords. Is typically it tends to be cheaper to bid on your own brand keyword rather than a more generic term. So
before we continue, I'm just sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
For the people who don't know and aren't familiar with keywords, could you just explain to us what is a keyword and what's the value that it holds when it comes to marketing, messaging, and so on? What is a keyword? What's the goal of a keyword? Because I don't think a lot of people really know on the essence of what it is and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of the Google discussion we're having, keyword would be what is the word or the phrase that someone has typed into the search box. Simply put. You'll then have branded keywords, which would be, specifically searching for a business.
Okay.
So like Hope It Helps podcast would be a branded keyword.
Gotcha.
Educational podcast would be a non-branded but category related keyword.
Okay.
So if you are a marketeer and you're looking to grow the podcast, you might say, oh, actually, hey, someone using educational podcast, they probably, there's a good chance that they might be interested in our content. So that's where I sort of look at branded versus unbranded keywords. Can be a really, really good strength understanding or an indicator as well is how good is your brand marketing is how many people search for you. I would use Google Trends, Google Search Console if it's set up. I normally love, always make sure that's set up with clients. But Google Search Console will show you what people are searching for. So, you might see that the podcast, 1,000 people a month are searching specifically for your podcast. But there might be 10,000 people a month searching for educational podcasts. So the scale tends to broaden, but that fluctuation over time can be a really good indicator of, are we are we succeeding in our brand marketing and building a strength and understanding of what we do with the customer if people are specifically searching for us. So what is quite interesting, and sort of pulling it back into the point that we were discussing, is it will be typically cheaper to bid on your own branded keyword than it would to be on, say, a category or an industry specific keyword.
That makes sense.
The reason being is that there will be more people competing on the category specific one.
Exactly.
If you are given, say I'm told as a marketeer, I need you to keep cost per install or cost per acquisition under $1. That bidding on my own keyword is suddenly going to look real attractive because you know that you can get cheap traffic from it. The challenge is that will potentially, nobody has an infinite marketing budget. So if you're told you need to keep cost per acquisition under $1, then probably what you're going to do as a marketeer to save your job or to save your client is you're going to pull budget from an area that's maybe very difficult to measure, but was generating, the demand. Ask yourself, what was making people search for your podcast in the first place? If you shift all of your money from difficult to measure demand generating like content, for example, difficult to measure, into intercept type marketing, which is they've searched for Hope It Helps podcast, let's make sure that they come to our website. That will look good if all you're looking at is cost per install or cost per view, cost per website visit. But over time, you're going to start seeing diminishing returns. You might have had 1,000 people search for your podcast last month, but in 3 months' time, you might only have 800, 700. Because whatever you were doing before, you've stopped doing to try and get those cheap installs to hit your targets. So that's something I'd always, if you're listening to this and you are, sort of in business leadership, is always think about what are those unintended consequences. And that's why I tend to, think about metrics and measurements of having like a constellation of them. Understanding that, revenue is my end goal, but what are the interim steps within that? What are the guardrails that keep me honest as a marketeer to be able to grow in a way that is actually beneficial to the business and not just a short-term patch to hit one specific metric?
Yeah. Man, that is so, I love listening to the way you speak about things because it makes me think deeper about these things that I don't typically do. And I think, I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think a majority of people don't. And I told you this last week when we met. We all, and you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, I think when it comes to marketing, when it comes to whatever, it's very top level. We're talking about the thing that everyone's talking about. But it's that next question, that next layer where the real, like the juices, the real value is. And the point you mentioned about keywords, how they work, also more importantly, the lens that you're analyzing your marketing through. If that's why when you said like, cost per acquisition, all right, that's going to push me down this way because I'm trying to hit that goal. And when you talked about sales and how marketing, some campaigns take time, but sales, we have an incentive to hit our target this month. So even in that relationship, we're playing yes, the end goal is the same, but our time horizons and how we get there are completely different. So that's also going to add another layer of friction to this. So I wanted to move on to optimization because I think this is like your secret. This is what you probably love to do the most. For me, the way I look at it, I'm like, data is the fuel, that optimization engine fuel, and marketers are always trying to test different types of things and whatever. Now, we also have to, and we talked about this briefly last week, we have to add into this optimization thing the time factor because that's a significant thing. So first of all, my first question on this is, how do you know when it's time to optimize?
It's always time to
optimize. Then let me move on to a second part of that question is, what's a reasonable time frame to make that decision?
Absolutely. So I think I'm always...
I love that answer.
No, I think for me it's about like intelligent but sometimes imperfect progress. And this
Okay,
is
that's interesting.
coming back to your point around like being comfortable that you cannot measure everything exactly. Trust me, I love measurement, but to really excel in driving revenue growth and growing businesses, you have to understand that not everything fits into a neat little measurement box. You cannot measure everything with the same yardstick. And once as a business you're happy with that, then it's that mindset and embracing that mentality that where you can really start experimenting, optimizing, being creative. You know, I love problem solving. Like that is what drives me. I'm constantly wanting to improve.
Yeah.
But I understand that sometimes you might try something and it might not work. It might fail, right? You have to be able to accept that.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to learn from that. You know, if you're making the same mistake 3 times in a row, there's a problem.
Exactly.
If you make a mistake and that unlocks an insight that allows you to iterate, expand, you know, grow even further, then brilliant. That mistake was part of the process.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there can be an unwillingness or a reluctance to acknowledge the mistake. You know, you sort of don't.
Very true.
You know, culturally.
Yeah, we talked about that too. Yeah.
Culturally, you know, in this region, we don't want to be seen to have made a mistake.
Yeah.
But if you want to grow fast, if you want to really take the business to the next level, there will be mistakes along that way.
Absolutely.
Because if you knew how to make $1 billion business and it was easy and there was here's the 10-step guide to making $1 billion, everyone would be doing it and there wouldn't be $1 billion to be made anymore.
True.
So it's understanding that you're not going to be able to measure everything in the same way. But it's about the process of experimentation. Set your goals, understand how, like, state how you will try to measure something. And also understand what level of risk are you comfortable with. And this level of risk could be spend, for example. Say you know that typically your cost of acquisition is $100. You have to state before you start with a new channel, how much am I willing to spend to understand if this will deliver results for me?
Yeah.
Because if you launch a new ad platform or a new channel, it's not going to be a day, right? You know, typically, you know, Meta, for example. Meta will say, you know, first 7 days we're learning, let us learn, as an example. So you have to be comfortable saying, okay, well, I'm going to need 7 days to be able to, before we really start assessing this. As part of that, you then have to say, okay, how much am I willing to commit to an experiment? And what is the point? Always go into an experiment stating what will be the conditions under which you will stop that experiment. And honestly, that's like, it's a simple approach, but often a lot of time people will say, I'm experimenting, but in reality, they're just launching a bunch of new things.
Exactly, yeah.
Be structured about it and say, okay, hey, I am willing to spend $1,000 on Meta to understand if I can acquire customers on that channel. And in that experiment plan, I would expect to have made 3 sales within the first 3 weeks.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah.
And be strict with yourself. If you don't hit the goals that you've set out, then you stop the experiment. You understand why it didn't work. It could be creative, it could be audience, it could be timing, as an example. You know, the amount of ads that were being run during the US election, I saw so many marketeers on channels like Reddit saying, my performance has gone really bad this month. And that was, I think, simply because there were just so many ads being run, the platform was saturated with ads, therefore there was lower possible returns for each advertiser. So I think that is it, and then sort of grounding it back in the psychology aspect is whenever you're experimenting with something, state what you're trying to do with it. Because going back to that point about demand generation versus demand capture, the example I just used then was I would expect to see X sales in Y days. But if that's an upper funnel experiment, you could say, I would expect to see an increase in followers. I would expect to see an increase in website traffic. I would expect to see an increase in search traffic. If you're a larger business, you might look at expect an increase in unaided brand awareness, as an example. You could bring survey data into it. But I think state your intentions and act with best intent. I think that would be honestly the sort of piece of advice I would give.
That's such good advice, man, because when I was thinking about that question, and because we've, kind of as you've experienced in your career and mine, you run a campaign and then sometimes the time, the spend is one area, but then it's the time horizon is the other. And especially we talked about this last week, managing clients' expectations. Clients are not comfortable with many time horizons, but some things do take that long to do. But I think operating from that framework with a clear objective, this is what we're trying to achieve, and having parameters and a time frame set is so useful, because I was thinking, because next time I can be all right, then you have the 5 variables that you put in that are controlled for this experiment. To do a new experiment would be very easy, because I'll be all right, this time I'm going to keep everything the same, but I'll let it run for 2 weeks instead of 1. So operating from that framework makes it a lot easier to iterate as you go along. Because like you said, that's such great advice, man. Putting those parameters in, now listening to it in my head, I'm oh man, that could be so useful. And that's how you can move in blocks and really test what works and so on.
And also for yourself, building a knowledge base of what you have done in the past.
Exactly.
Because if you're not documenting it, you're not ever really going to learn from what you've done. You're just kind of doing untethered things.
You
might call it experimentation, but essentially you're just launching channels. You're throwing mud at the wall and hoping something sticks.
Exactly.
So I think that's honestly, and this is where the sort of engineering mindset comes in, is being structured with it, and really, stating the intentions. That's such great. That really, really is amazing advice, man. And so if we take that now, because I know you've a lot, when you work with clients, and in the past you've audited many marketing campaigns. Now, I know based on what we just talked about, I'm okay, you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, you bring that kind of framework into the audit. How much did you spend? How long is it running for? And then you break down, what the variables are and so on. But like you said, and like we've talked about a lot today, the numbers can be very misleading. The insight I take from these numbers can make me think I'm doing great, whether that's from impressions, whether that, the example you gave me last week about the customer who had X acquisition cost, but was actually they were actually losing money when you look, deeper into it. So what advice would you have, or what's your framework when it comes to auditing campaigns? Because I think this could be very useful to many other marketers or people running marketing campaigns themselves, so what's that process look like for you? I think starting off asking what's important to my business.
Okay.
Here's a wonderful example. I won't name names, otherwise I'll really get in trouble.
Okay. Sure.
So one campaign I once audited was for an event taking place in the UAE. The goal of the campaign was to sell tickets to that event. The agency were optimizing towards impressions. But in reality, those impressions don't mean a thing the day after the event's passed. True. Because you have a finite window to make a sale.
Yeah.
So when I audited the campaign, the client had said, oh yeah, we want impressions. And trust me, if you want impressions, marketeers and ad platforms will give you impressions. But for me, it should always be impressions and Like, what is it leading to?
Mm-mm.
And I remember auditing the campaign, and what the agency had done is there is I don't know if many people know this, but on Meta, there is an opportunity to expand the audience. And what that does is you could say, hey, I want to target Dubai. But then there's a little box you can tick that says expand the audience to people interested in the location. And, you know, since we have said, Habibi, come to Dubai, there has been a lot of people that want to come to Dubai. But the matter of the fact is, they are not in Dubai at this moment. So if you are running an advert for Dubai tourism, then expanding that audience to people that are interested in Dubai, it's a great idea, right? Because what you're trying to do is bring that person to Dubai sometime in the future.
Yes.
If you are advertising an event that's taking place 2 weeks from now, you really don't want to be expanding that audience, because the likelihood, you know, the likelihood of someone flying in for that event was really low.
Yeah.
I won't say too much, otherwise you'll figure out who it was. But it was not, you know, it was not an A-list artist, as an example. You know, it wasn't the kind of concert that someone goes, damn, they are never coming to the Middle East for another 3 years. I am flying into the UAE.
It doesn't have that draw.
It doesn't have that draw. It was a small event for a local audience. And what ended up happening is when we looked at that, I just looked at it very quickly and said, you're not going to make any sales. And that was simply because of the way they were targeting. But going back to my point earlier, they delivered on what was asked of them. The client asked them for impressions. They gave impressions. But the reality is they spent a fortune, and that event did not break even. That event lost money. And that was the reason why I was called in to audit, was to try and figure out how to make it better next time. So I think that it's really, really important, is asking yourself what is important for your business. Because honestly, like Dubai tourism, impressions have more weight, because that purchase consideration journey is longer. And, you know, you've got that opportunity to build Dubai as a destination. But if you are a coffee shop, or, you know, your cafu, again, so I don't know why it's in my head today, advertising to people interested but not in Dubai is completely pointless.
Yeah.
So I think that honestly comes back to that point of really understanding what drives value for the business, and how quickly do you need it to drive value.
Yeah.
Because those impressions for that event are worthless. The date the event has passed, no point.
So I'm curious, what would you have done in that event example? What would you have done differently to get ticket sales? Where was the, like, okay, the client wanted impressions, they got them impressions. Yeah. You looked at it and you're like, but what you really wanted was ticket sales. That was the goal for the event, to make money, to whatever. Absolutely. So what would you have done differently then to get those ticket sales? So what was actually fascinating about this is I'd actually helped consult with them beforehand. And I had essentially recommended an experiment for them to try. And that experiment was, the audience that I had created with them was a lookalike audience of previous customers. So the event was a brand. So the brand had existing customers. They had a warm list of people that they could have reached out to, that they could have used to, particularly on Meta, they could have used as a training set to create what's called a lookalike audience. They could have also advertised to those people. The agency set up the experiment that I recommended to them. The issue was that they then, during that experiment, optimized towards impressions rather than sales. So when I looked back at the ad sets, ad set B had lower impressions, but significantly greater sales. But what had happened is the agency were only focused on impressions. And they introduced a bias at the very beginning of the experiment.
So the one thing that I recommended is that they split the budget equally, and after a week, they do a assessment of which one is performing best. But what happened is they gave more budget to their audience, which was essentially very, very broad. It was people in Dubai or interested in being in Dubai. Whereas my audience was, here are people that have bought the products that you are trying to... Essentially, it was an event that people participated in, and the products, you could infer from the products whether or not they were participating in that type of event.
Sure.
So the challenge was, because they didn't deploy the budgets evenly to begin with, when they checked on the experiment, they said, number one's doing better because it's got more impressions. But that shows me a complete lack of understanding of how the ad platform works. Like Meta, you are paying for impressions. There's a term called CPM, which is cost per mille, or cost per 1,000 people that see the ad.
Yeah.
So if I give ad group A $1,000 and ad group B $200, ad group A is getting more impressions every single time.
Yeah, true.
So then what they did is they actually, despite the fact that it was tracked and ad set B was giving them more sales, they stopped ad set B and put the money into ad set A because it was, quote unquote, giving more impressions. So this comes to the unintended consequence. They were being measured on impressions.
I see.
They wanted to give more impressions. I really would say that the level of skill of whoever was operating that campaign was next to nothing, and they should not be trusted with money. But the reality of it is, they gave impressions. So I think it comes back to that point of what actually matters.
Yeah.
You know, and what do you know about the people that you want to come to this, event? What do you know about your prospective audience? Because, Meta has great targeting features. You can go in and say, I want people that are interested in a particular sport, or are fans of this celebrity, or watch this TV show. Ask yourself, who are your ideal customers? And then make a judgment call on what targeting conditions you need to use to reach those people. Yeah. It's easy to get impressions. It's lazy. If all you're reporting on impressions is lazy. Yeah. I'll upset a few people saying that, but I really do believe it.
No, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's what you believe in. Yeah. That's what your experiences showed you. That's such a great example, and I'm really happy that we were able to walk through it and work through it together, because it comes back to what you're talking about, is what is really important. And again, as we've discussed today, different campaigns have different objectives. So in the example that you just said with the events, our objective was revenue in terms of ticket sales, but we got distracted and started looking at it from a different metric, which also has value, but it's not exactly what we're looking for right now. This doesn't necessarily equal that. So, and you mentioned, and this is something I haven't really asked anyone about before, so it just came up listening to you, is targeting. Now, I know, targeting in my mind comes down to two different things. It's the three: who, where, and when. Now, and you said, when it what if I came to you and Andrew, I'm trying to generate more leads for my business, for example, and I want to target people. Now, targeting, I know if we could have a probably 5-hour podcast on the importance of targeting and the factors that go into it, that's not what I'm asking. But when it comes to targeting, what are some foundational things I should be basing my setup on? Not necessarily how to set it up, but the mindset behind targeting.
I think it starts with defining who you want to target, and then thinking about where is the right place to find them. You'll see different behaviors on different platforms. If you are B2B, LinkedIn tends to be a great place to target someone, because with the LinkedIn algorithm and the LinkedIn ad set, you can go very, very granular, like really down to a point of like job roles, and there's a lot of specificity to LinkedIn targeting. But it's expensive.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt you, but because you brought up LinkedIn, because I've run LinkedIn campaigns before, and like you said, if you're looking at across Google, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, LinkedIn is by far the most expensive. But when you said that you can get very granular, either one of two things that means, because my experience is the amount of fucking ads I get on LinkedIn and the amount of in-mails, Andrew, that have like absolutely nothing to do with me. Like, I am so far from, it's almost an insult that you sent this to me, because I just see this is pure money wasted because I have nothing to do with this. So, and I get this a lot. This is not one, I can say in all my time on LinkedIn, there's maybe been once or twice that I've gotten an in-mail message that was like, even if I didn't want the product, it was relevant to me. The rest is pure bullshit. Yeah. That's just been my experience. Maybe you've had a different one. Sorry to interrupt, but it just triggered me on that, because I'm like, man, absolutely. I don't get it.
And also as well, I'd say you're probably being a little bit lazy as an advertiser if you're not using that channel to its full potential.
They're using that database approach, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And I think what you also have to think about, particularly in a B2B context, is how are you adding value? Because coming back to our point earlier about, sort of relationship and dating, if you just jump straight to an in-mail and say, hey, buy my product, the response is normally going to be,
no thanks. Yeah.
But one of the strategies I'd like to consider on LinkedIn is promoting content. We think about that purchase cycle. If you are a services business, somebody who might benefit from your product or service may not be ready to purchase right now. So how are you creating like lead funnels, as an example? So, say you're for your agency for sort of podcast consultancy. If you were to just jump to 1,000 emails and say, hey, you want a podcast? I'll do it for you. It's probably going to go terribly.
Yeah.
But if you promote content that shows the benefit of podcasts and allow people to sign up for the newsletter, where you're going to, regularly share valuable content about trends within the podcast industry, the likelihood of you getting a response to that, I would say, is far, far greater, because you are adding some value to that end consumer. You have to acknowledge as a marketeer that they might not buy tomorrow. And this comes back to that challenge around immediacy of need and sales targets. But as a long-term brand building, positioning, like you're spending a lot of money on LinkedIn to get in front of the right people. You can get in front of the right people, so then don't waste it. Think about, what are you going to say to them when?
Yeah.
And acknowledge that not everyone is going to be ready to buy immediately, but how are you nudging them towards a sale? How are you starting to build that relationship? And, like data journalism is something that I find very fascinating. People love facts. They love insights. If you can say, hey, did you know podcasting, business podcasting has increased 38% in the last year in the UAE? I completely made up statistic, by the way, so please don't quote me on that.
No fact checking.
But the likelihood of a business leader looking at that and saying, oh, okay, if it's growing, why is it growing? It's going to pique their interest. You've started to generate some interest. You've started to generate some demand because you've provided value.
Yeah.
You've provided some unique content to that end consumer.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to think about. It is that time, but also the messaging, and not just jumping straight to buy my product.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I get what you're talking about, and like I love that we kind of got somehow ended up on LinkedIn. That wasn't part of where I was going today, but because LinkedIn is something I use a lot as well. LinkedIn is, I think, the ultimate. And we touched on this a bit last week, like social selling / personal branding, like platform nowadays. It's about promoting your content, and you really need to. It's one of the few areas I think is very. You have to give for a long time so that like people on LinkedIn know, like Andrew's the marketing guy, he's the revenue guy. Khaled, for example, is the podcast guy, building our own personal brands in those spaces, and then you can start to leverage that and be more specific with like your campaigns and so on. I had someone on the podcast a few years ago, and they had basically got like a CRM that was just for LinkedIn. So you could run full sales marketing campaigns through their platform. They would gather all the leads for you, kind of like play on sales now, but with a bit more functionality. So one of the things, this is just a random thing, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I've done this too. So I'm guilty, guys, 100% guilty of this. Back when I was working for companies and doing sales, what I would do is, and this is what happens to me left, right, and center, is I'm gonna reach out. I'm just gonna send you a connect request. I don't need no information, no nothing, whatever. We have now connected. I hate when someone does that, and the next fucking thing I get is like, "Hey Khaled, are you interested in this product? Interested in this service?" Yeah. So I hate that.
Buy me a coffee first, at least.
I'm gonna be honest, I've done that too. So it's not something I haven't done. He said his approach was very interesting. He's like, when he connects with someone, he's directly selling to them. And I'm like, okay. And then we kind of talked about what we talked about today, about relationships, about all that kind of stuff. But his approach is very interesting to me, because he's like, I'm going to connect with you and I'm going to try to sell you. That's going to do one of two things. Either you're interested and that we can jumpstart this conversation quickly, or absolutely you're not interested, and then I don't have to waste my time going through that. So what are your thoughts? I still haven't figured out which one I prefer. I think there's elements of both. I really hate this one because I think it's happening to me a lot. Yeah. So like I have a negative bias about it, which maybe I shouldn't. But I do like his approach. It does seem quite efficient, but is it the best return? Are you going to build the best relationship? Maybe not.
I think it depends on the context of who you are, what you're selling. You sort of mentioned personal brand briefly. Like if it's direct, it's transactional, some people might see success from it. I'm probably going to get I'll get absolutely hounded by this poor guy for making this comparison. But one of the things with scammers is a lot of the time scams will deliberately leave in spelling mistakes, or they will deliberately make them look like obvious scams, because it flushes out the people that are not going to get scammed. If you receive a scam email with a spelling mistake in the headline from ADCY Bank and you click through to that, the chances of that person being scammed are really, really high. So that's why people do it.
Interesting.
My wife works in data, and one of the things that she's sort of really worked on is fraud protection for businesses. So I have a bit of an understanding around this from that context. I'm not running some scam on the side in case you're wondering. So I understand the psychology behind it, in the sense of you kind of flush out people that aren't interested real quick.
Exactly.
The question then is, how quickly do you burn through everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. True, very true.
And also it comes back to that point of, where is the opportunity? Because opportunities change. I think understanding like your marketing will be fluid is really important, because the thing is, say for example, this person that you had on 2 years ago, say they went on 10 podcasts and said, this has really been working for me. I can guarantee you that there were other people going, oh, brilliant, I'm going to try that. And then suddenly every morning you open LinkedIn and you have 10 different emails being like, buy my thing. And you're like, oh,
What have I done?
You're not even opening emails anymore.
Yeah.
Like the behavior on the recipient side changes because everyone's doing the same thing. So there might have been a 6-month window where that was absolutely the alpha play to run on LinkedIn. The challenge is there are now hundreds of companies offering that service automated through AI.
Yeah.
And inboxes of decision makers are absolutely saturated.
Yeah.
So, there's diminishing returns, is I think the point that I make. And I will never outright reject the notion that something could be successful. I'm sure, people will generate success, but then it comes down to the, does it fit with your brand tone? Does it fit with your, like the way that you're operating yourself or you're operating a business? Because if you're a business and your, service is built on trust, as an example, I'm trying to think of an example, like say you're a legal consultancy.
Yeah.
Huge trust aspect to that. Do you damage your brand by spamming out 1,000 emails a day? Because then suddenly you're not seen as a trusted authority in the space. You're seen as, they're just desperate to get a sale.
Yeah.
And I think that's why context is so important for me.
Absolutely. And I think like reflecting on our conversation today, everything we've talked about is context. There's and I think this is probably one of your ethoses in all aspects, which is there's no one size fits all framework. It's very situational. What works here might not work there, and what worked there might work very well here, and vice versa. So, and even on the LinkedIn example that you talked about, I didn't consider that next level of what is my personal brand, and would this kind of approach that we talked about is very aggressive. I'd call it aggressive, direct approach.
Absolutely.
Is that who I am? Is it not? And I didn't even think of that link. I just thought of it. I'm like, oh, this is a strategy. Test it out, see what happens. But that next level is so important. And I wanted to round off our conversation today, Andrew, with we kind of have to touch on this topic. You just mentioned it as well. It's all over the fucking place, which is AI. Now, and I would be remiss if I didn't speak to someone like you with your analytical mindset about AI. Now, so I follow a guy called Neil Patel. He's one of the global experts as SEO experts and so on, and I'm subscribed to Answer the Public and everything. So I've been learning, with time, what are insights, what does this mean, what does that mean? Still not great at it, but I'm getting there. So now with AI, you can create visual content, you can create videos, you can create scripts, you can create SEO keyword research. You can do so much with AI in marketing. Now, I'm not coming at it from the angle of, this will replace jobs, whatever. That's not what I'm interested in, really. My question to you is, where does it fit into all of this? Because everything's becoming so automated, we're kind of losing what we touched on earlier, is the creativity, the authentic creativity, not the creativity of what you're producing with AI, but the creativity that's coming from you as a person. So I'm just curious from you, where does AI fit in all this? And if I was your client and I'm like, Andrew, we want to incorporate AI into some of our processes or places. And again, I know it's contextual, but I guess where would be the first places, or what would you recommend? Where would you recommend me to implement it? At least as a start.
So I saw a quote attributed to the CEO of NVIDIA the other day, which was, AI isn't going to replace you, but somebody using AI will.
Facts.
So,
Facts.
But this is the way you think about it. And
true.
I'm a very big believer of keeping a human in that loop.
Yeah.
Like for me, I see AI as an efficiency tool. AI can be a great way of streamlining processes,
Yep.
particularly repeatable processes.
Exactly, yeah.
But you think you have to understand and define what those processes are. Where can you save time? Keyword research. Brilliant. Right? But you still then want a human to be able to interpret it, to interpret the context.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm trying to think of a good example of this right now. The first one that comes to mind is a bit random, but I'm going to go with it. Dog kennel. Okay. Dog kennel, that's a keyword, that could be somebody looking for somewhere for their dog to stay when they go on holiday, a daycare or a boarding facility, or they could be looking for a kennel in their own home.
True.
Example.
Yeah.
The context is quite difficult to interpret. AI would, at this moment in time, see that dog kennel. So you'd be like, I want to bid on all of those terms. Actually, here's a really good one. So working with a HR consultancy or recruitment business, you're trying to generate leads on Google. How do you determine the difference between a job seeker and somebody that is looking for support to recruit for their own business?
Ooh.
Because the language is very similar.
Yeah, that's very subtle difference. It's a very subtle difference, you're right.
But there are 1,000 job seekers for every prospective client there are. That's a good example of why having a human in the loop is really important, because you can understand the context. You know, what are the subtle differences in the language a job seeker would use versus someone looking for support on the recruitment side. So I think that is kind of one example, but I think that's where, you know, for me, I love using AI to help me with research, as an example. And it can, you know, maybe distill 10 articles to point me in the direction of one that, you know, I want to spend more time on as a person. Yeah. So I really see it at this moment in time as an efficiency tool, as a way of automating and streamlining processes.
Yeah. And I think the quote that, you know, the head of NVIDIA said, I think that's so true. Someone I had on my podcast not long ago told me that, he's like, Khaled, with AI, like kind of how the internet came and changed the game. He's like, with AI, he's like, imagine a chessboard. AI is now coming and wiping that entire chessboard. All the old players, it's a brand new arena, brand new players. And the ones who will be successful, I believe, and what I've seen, are who can use AI most efficiently for what they're doing. Whatever that is, whether that's research or production or whatever the case might be. Andrew, I have two last questions for you. These are questions that I ask all my guests. So first of all, looking back either personally or professionally, when I ask you the question, what are you most proud of for yourself? What would you say?
Oh, I don't know. I can talk fluidly about marketing, but you asked me about myself and you stumped me. I don't know. I'd probably say I suppose willingness to grow as a person. You know, constantly striving for improvement and sort of being open to new experiences. You know, I was born in a very, very small village and spent most of my life growing up, you know, sort of very remote. So I've really, you know, tried to push myself, you know, first moving to London and then moving to Dubai, and, you know, sort of being open-minded and you know, challenging myself to new experiences. Yeah,
I love asking that question because, and it's funny, recently when the recent conversations I had, everyone takes that, I was like, oh, like no one's expecting it. But I always feel like when I ask why I love asking that question, whatever answer comes up in that moment is the real answer. Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. It's very clear that you're, you know, from our conversations and the time we spent together in this podcast, that you're the type of person who's always looking to optimize, get better, improve, something I resonate with. That's what I try to do as well. I have nowhere near the analytical brain that you have, but I do it in my own different way. And for my last question, Andrew, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Context. Consider
Yes.
consider the context.
Yeah,
I think consider the context of what you're trying to do, and never be afraid to ask questions and try and improve that.
You couldn't have ended it in a better way, given everything we've talked about. Andrew, man, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been like a masterclass for me in marketing. You've really, really opened my mind to so many things I didn't know about. You've given me the opportunity to now have a new lens to look at everything I'm doing with, when it comes to my business, when it comes to marketing, to look at that next stage, to think deeper. I think anyone, whether you're a marketer, whether you're a business owner, anyone at any stage can learn so much from this conversation and what you shared with us today. So I want to say thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate it. If people want to work with you, reach out to you, what's the best place for us to get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn, I think.
LinkedIn?
Drop us a
Don't
note.
spam him, but
It's all right.
Send him a good.
Honestly, it's a warm lead if it comes from you.
There you go.
I also love coffee as well. So
Perfect. There you go, guys. Some coffee or some just conversations that'll do the job.
Perfect.
Andrew, man, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. Guys, so everyone listening, please make sure to like, share, follow, and subscribe at Hope It Helps Pod on all channels. And as always, guys, hope it helps. Peace. And that's another episode in the bag, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. All I'm trying to do is give back with this podcast. So if you walked away from this episode having learned something new, gained a new perspective, or you simply just enjoyed the episode, that means I've done my job. If you could please do me the small favor of hitting that subscribe button, it would really mean the world to me and would help me build the show and build the channel. And that's all I ask. Stay tuned for a lot more conversations, new topics, more exciting guests. But until then, and until next time, guys, hope it helps. Peace.